This is Against the Grain on Pacifica Radio and online at kpfa.org. My name is C.S. Soong. A friend of mine, a former KPFA colleague, sometimes wore a T-shirt that said on the front, "Yes, I am black," and on the back of the shirt were the words, "No, I am not a criminal." That message suggests and confronts something my friend perceived and understood about prevailing attitudes toward African Americans. Now, what my friend and other blacks confront on a daily basis in the context of a society drenched in white privilege is elaborated in fascinating and provocative detail in a new book by George Yancy. The book is Black Bodies, White Gazes, The Continuing Significance of Race, and George Yancy teaches in the philosophy department at Duquesne University. George has edited numerous books, including Philosophy in Multiple Voices, White on White, Black on Black, and What White Looks Like, African American Philosophers on the Whiteness Question. He joins us today to talk about Black Bodies, White Gazes, and specifically about the lived experiences of blacks in relation to whites, the nature of whiteness, and the contours of effective white anti-racist work. George Yancy joins us now by phone from Pittsburgh. Welcome, George.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me start by asking you about the project of this book. What's the basic project you've undertaken with this volume?
Sure. I think the basic project was really to look at the way in which philosophers have avoided the question of embodiment, particularly issues of racial embodiment. And I sort of take that theme from the work of Charles Mills, who talks about non-Cartesian sums. And by that he means this way in which we understand philosophy from the perspective of those bodies that suffer in their embodiment. So unlike Descartes, where philosophy is done in this very abstract, disembodied fashion, the non-Cartesian sum, for an example, would be Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, where he is constantly confronted with issues of invisibility, where whites refuse to see him. So it becomes, a very interesting way in which to do philosophy from this perspective of embodiment, and particularly from this perspective of invisibility. And also challenges, I think, the goals of philosophy and what philosophy ought to be about, right?
Can the history of the black body in the U.S. be separated from the history of whiteness?
Yes and no. No, in as much as I argue throughout the text, and I might explain that by way of a particular construct that I use in the book, namely whiteness as the transcendental norm. And technically, when I use that term in the book, I'm talking about referring rather to Immanuel Kant's claim that space and time are necessary and universal transcendental conditions for what he calls the possibility of experience. But to say that whiteness is the transcendental norm is not to say that whiteness is necessary or, in some sense, universal. It's to say that whiteness is the standard against which blackness is defined. So in that dialectical sense, no. Since whiteness is the transcendental norm, it basically means that other groups are, whether, red groups, yellow groups, what have you, are defined as different or deviant, while whiteness remains the same in some very fundamental way. And I'll tell you how this works. What's interesting is during the election, I asked my predominantly white students, what was it about this election that made it so unique? And without fail, they generally say race and gender. And by this they mean that, there's a black candidate and there's a female candidate. Mm-hmm. In other words, whiteness and maleness here function as transcendental norms, whereas blackness and femaleness are sites of difference. And then I bring it to their attention that isn't it been the case that all previous presidential elections has been about race and gender, right? And so then they think, yes, because it's always been about whiteness and blackness. About whiteness and maleness. Mm-hmm. So it's only against whiteness and maleness as transcendental norms that blackness here and femaleness gets defined as different.
And